Good morning from Menlo Park, California. This is Terry Gibbons. I am the CEO and founder of the Center for Higher Education Leadership, and I'm very excited to be here today with this AASCU webinar series. This is number 4 for us, and it's on course scheduling in the time of COVID-19, using course schedule to strategically manage financial stability. So we're very happy to have a great panel today. We have Tom Shaver, who's the founder and CEO of AASCU. And we also have Christine Givner, who's the Dean and Professor of the College of Education, State University of New York at Fredonia. And Bill, I apologize if I misstate your last name, but Bill Biggie, who's the Vice President of Learning and Student Success of John Tyler Community College. John, and did I get your name right?
No.
Oh, that's actually, no, we have I'm reading the wrong thing.
Panel. Yep.
A different panel. Steve Bullard, who's a PhD provost of Stephen F. Austin University. That's what I get for reading my script. So anyway, Steve, apologies for that. But yeah, thanks to everybody again for joining us. Again, I'm the CEO and founder of the Center for Higher Education Leadership, and I'm going to speak a little bit while we wait for people to join in, because I know sometimes it takes a little time for people to join. So I want to talk a little bit about the Center for Higher Education Leadership. We're a leadership development platform for higher ed folks, faculty all the way up to provosts and presidents. And we have a great platform that provides online support and courses and mentors and so on. And we're very excited to work with AASCU because we know that course scheduling is an important component of everything that we do. I've been a provost, and I was a provost at Menlo College and also a vice provost at UT Austin for undergraduate curriculum. And believe me, I have seen a lot of issues with course scheduling over the years. I know, for example, that we often would use things like whiteboards to do course scheduling, and it really was not efficient at all. And I hope by now they've changed. That was a while ago, but you know, even as the provost at a small college like Menlo College, I know that course scheduling was really critical to everything we did, because we had to make sure we got students in the right classes at the right time, so that they could graduate, so that they could you know, be able to take a full load of courses, and all of these things are really important. And as you know, it's really important to be able to focus on how do we sustain academic excellence in a time of constrained resources. We know that whether you're a public or a private, it's going to be a tough year. And, you know, many academic decisions drive the costs and revenue at an institution. Course and academic program data are essential for leaders to make strategic decisions about the future. So this webinar will introduce actionable short and long-term strategies for using the course schedule and academic program data to manage efficiencies while improving student success. And we know we're all about student success, but we also know that this year in particular, it's going to be very important to focus on using our strategies to manage financial sustainability. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Tom Shaver, who is the CEO and founder of AASCU.
Thanks, Terry. And I'll try to be brief, because I know most of you showed up to hear your peers talk about things that they're doing on their campus and how they're being innovative through these challenging times. This is the fourth of a 4-part series on course scheduling in the time of COVID-19. In the first part of the series, we talked about kind of short-term scrappy ways that you could refine the course schedule to remove unnecessary sections that were perennially underfilled, but also make sure that you were supplying enough seats in bottlenecked courses. In the second series, we talked about how you could monitor a very unpredictable fall 2020 registration cycle to make changes to get ahead of late cancellations and late adds. In the third series, we talked about analyzing the enrollment health of the various credentials we offer on a campus and how pathways can be used to improve enrollment health for lower enrollment majors. And in this, the last segment, we're talking about how specifically we can model financial sustainability or the instructional margin at a program level, and even get all the way down to the course level, so we can really dial in are not only our costs, but also make sure that we're not constraining revenues by how we're offering our course schedule. So, this isn't too profound. I'm sure that you've seen plenty of things are out there in the news, and you've had plenty of conversations already on campus about how important it is to plan moving forward. I know a lot of you are planning for multiple scenarios for the fall term. In this particular, these last two webinar sessions, we're really looking at how we can focus on post-fall and forward on how we can really become more financially sustainable in these uncertain times and for the longer term. And we know obviously that financial pressure for many of you has gone from bad to worse, that your state budgets are going to be greatly constrained. We also know from our research and benchmarking, we've benchmarked about 320 institutions. We have some data on that I'm going to briefly show and that we're going to share after this. But we know from our research that most institutions struggle to optimally allocate their faculty. It's a very complicated problem to manage the course schedule, and there are a lot of underfilled and a lot of overloaded courses in a typical schedule. We also know that constrained majors and certain courses that are inefficiently managed really limit enrollments and revenue in a typical schedule. So we want to talk about those things and give you some more specific strategies, again, just as a framework here in this deck before we transition to Chris and Steve. Okay, so I mentioned this earlier, but even pre-COVID, we knew that from our research that even at AASCU institutions, which by the way are somewhat more efficient than other institutions in our benchmark database, the institutions we've benchmarked about, I believe 76 AASCU institutions, we found that a typical AASCU institution in a major academic term they still had 36% of the courses they offered that were underfilled. That means fewer than 70% of the offered seats were enrolled in at census date. We also know that a big percentage of courses were overloaded. So 31% of the typical courses offered in a schedule were actually overloaded and probably constraining enrollments and therefore at least indirectly tuition revenues. So we also know that the schedule is very complex. So we're not saying any of these things to try to demean what you are doing. We're simply saying that the schedule is complicated, it's an expensive problem to manage, and we need to, especially now, we need to really up our game as an industry about how we manage this problem. So relative to specifically the planning framework that we are going to be talking about today, we think first and foremost it needs to be actionable. So unlike other frameworks that you might have seen in terms of financial modeling, where they really follow the budget model of looking at an academic unit and the indirect and direct instructional costs more from a budgeting perspective, we think that a much more actionable approach is to follow the student when modeling. And what we mean by that is to actually look at the students sitting in your various courses and what major they're coming from, and then attribute cost and revenue to those students, because that's essentially the variable part of how you're rolling out your offerings to the students. And traditional budgeting, as I mentioned, it's limited because it really gets to cost management. There's not a lot of visibility into the revenue or the instructional margin. Whereas program level analysis really supports a lot of visibility into all the way down to the course, into visibility about how we're doing, and then allows us to aggregate it up. So we can see from a financial standpoint which majors are contributing to instructional margin, which majors are being subsidized, and how to improve both. And then finally, and I guess in a relative to that last comment, program level analysis really gets down to or sets the stage for deeper modeling of student and financially friendly strategies. And I've just listed a few here. Last week's topic is the first bullet point, cohort enrollment health planning, where you're looking at your populations of students, how they're getting fragmented, by campus or by modality, and whether or not those populations are sustainable size. We can get into meta majors and other pathway type planning. We can look at curricular design where we maybe homogenize some of the gen ed core so that we're teaching similar or the same courses for most of our students, and therefore we get a lot of enrollment health that way. And then we could look at specific pathway refinement, especially in low enrollment majors, where we can see, for example, is course choice further fragmenting enrollments? Are we maybe in a situation where enrollments are so low in certain majors that we need to have a well-publicized kind of rotation schedule where this certain course is only offered in the fall, this course is only offered in the spring? And while we don't like those kinds of strategies from a student progress perspective, we certainly think that if you're going to do that, you need to be very visible with your students about that and very planful and get ahead of that in advance. So here's an example of how we might look at cost allocation and similarly revenue allocation. This example though is cost allocation. So we're assuming that, let's say we have 2 sections of a course that we roll out with total direct instructional cost of $10,000. And let's say that it's an 100% required course in the business major, but it's also an option in management, marketing, and accounting. And you can see from this hypothetical, we have 50 students taking it from business, 20 from management, 13 from marketing, and 6 from accounting. And so then you can basically just do a simple distribution analysis and allocation of the cost and the revenue of that course proportionally. So for example, those 50 students represent 56% of the cost and the revenue allocation. And so, simple math tells us that 56% obviously of 10,000 means that that particular major business gets 5,600 of the cost for that course. That leads us to, again, some very simple, but I think very powerful instructional margin analysis. If we want to get more sophisticated here, we can include indirect expenses, which get a little bit more complicated, certainly, to assess. But in this particular hypothetical, we're talking about 4 programs of study where we're allocating direct revenue and direct expense and yielding an instructional margin. So for example, program A, let's just say it has flat enrollments, but we want to continue to manage the direct expenses there so that we can at least maintain, if not improve upon, that 15% instructional margin of $15,000. Program B, let's say it also has flat enrollment, but because its direct instructional expenses are higher, we might need to look at targeted section reductions or maybe some pathway refinements to kind of tighten up the offerings and improve potentially seat fill in those program requirements. Let's just say program C has growing enrollments. So what we want to do is to continue to market that program aggressively and continue to promote growth, because not only is it yielding a lot of revenue, but it's yielding a lot of instructional margin. And then finally, in program D's case, a very low enrollment with low revenue kind of a program, we want to continue to manage those direct expenses. Now, the thing here that I want to point out is that in this example, and I think in most cases when we do this kind of work, we're not targeting majors or programs for elimination. We're targeting basically strategies to make every major more favorable from a financial health standpoint. So we want to take the thriving programs and obviously continue to grow them. We want to take the struggling programs and make them more financially sustainable. So this just provides some clarity into how to do that. And when we look at that, and again, this is really the last thing I want to speak to before transitioning. When we look at kind of how all these things fit together, we can start in a variety of different places when we're looking at how to manage the academic enterprise more holistically. Again, in this particular case, we're talking about managing financial health. But again, as I mentioned, last week we were talking about managing enrollment health. And I think hopefully you can see the synergy between those things is, that healthier enrollments tend to yield healthier finances on a major by major basis. And there are certain things that we can do from a design standpoint that will improve financial health as we improve enrollment health. That can come down to targeted schedule refinements that we can make. But the bottom line, I think, here is that in very few cases are we talking about actually cutting programs. This is a much more surgical, much more targeted approach of managing financial sustainability. And for your reference, I mentioned some of the metrics that we have benchmarked, where we've benchmarked 76 of your AASCU peers, and those data are available in the last slide on the deck. So with that, if I can figure out how to get to this screen, here we go. Now I'll stop sharing and turn it over, I think, to Chris.
Well, before we go to Chris, I just want to remind folks that they can use the Q&A at the bottom of the Zoom to submit questions. And I know a few people have joined us. Just a quick reintroduction of Chris Givner from State University of New York at Fredonia, and Steve Bullard from Stephen F. Austin State University, who will be joining us today. And just a quick reminder that you're invited to stay on the Zoom call for office hours with the Ad Astra team to have follow-up discussion and additional Q&A. So I hope you will stay with us, and we hope you have lots of questions, because I will be calling on people. So go ahead, Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for the invitation. This has been very interesting. I was interested in seeing Tom's numbers as he was talking about financial sustainability from a program level. I guess I would say that as a dean, I really have to look at it from the budget that I'm given. And so that's kind of going to be my framework of looking at both short-term and long-term financial planning for our unit, the College of Education. So I'd like to start out first by just explaining a little bit about who SUNY Fredonia is, or what SUNY Fredonia is. It was founded as a teacher's college in 1826, and it's a small public regional comprehensive university. It's located on about 300 acres, about 2 miles from Lake Erie in Chautauqua County in Western New York. Our total enrollment is 4,463 students. That's down from a high of about 5,600 students just a few years ago. The undergraduate population is about 4,200 students, and the graduate population is about 230 students. The enrollment of the College of Ed consists of 868 of those, of all of those students, with 723 undergraduate and 136 graduate students. So in the College of Education, we have 29 programs at the undergraduate and graduate level, 16 undergraduate programs, 10 graduate programs, and 3 multi-degree programs. So you can see kind of the complexity of the curriculum that we're dealing with in terms of trying to manage optimal schedules for our students across all of those programs. That gives you a taste of what SUNY Fredonia is. So as I said at the beginning, as a dean, the most significant way that I contribute, our unit contributes to the financial health of the university, I see as 2 main priorities. One, offering a robust, effective, efficient schedule that supports student success completion across all of the programs we're responsible for in the College of Ed. And 2, ongoing revision and creation of new programs that better meet the changing needs of the region and the state. And so I'd like to start out talking about how we have tried to systematically build, monitor, and revise a schedule to support maximum efficiency of students being able to successfully complete their programs. So I would say there are 3 things: holistic schedule planning, ongoing monitoring of a registration using data from Ad Astra as well as other sources of data, and changing the schedule using data. And I like to start out because when you come into a campus culture, everyone, courses are given to senior faculty. I own that course. So when I first came to SUNY Fredonia, I really had to lay out some planning assumptions and really make sure that they understood that this was how we were going to go forward. And so the planning assumptions for schedule building was schedules are based on student need for courses and programmatic sequence. Tenure track faculty would have a full professional obligation, meaning they're assigned to courses based on either a 4-3 schedule or a 3-3 schedule, depending on whether they taught all graduate courses or a mixture of graduate and undergraduate courses. Tenure track faculty are assigned to courses based on their expertise and programmatic need, and then some serious consideration to any kind of stated preferences, but that doesn't come first. No faculty member owns a course, no matter how senior they are. And curriculum refinement and development is a shared responsibility. And that every course is based on a set of shared student learning outcomes that all of the course instructors need to abide by, so that there's collaboration across course instructors teaching the same course, different sections of the same course, and there's a course coordinator. This has really served us well to kind of systematize our schedule building. And then in terms of the chronology of how we build a schedule, hopefully that results in a nice solid student-centered schedule, is that we start about a year out, and the deans and the provost begin, and this has been 3 years now, having a webinar with an AASCU data analyst to do a retrospective review of efficiency of the university schedule for the past couple of years. And I found this very helpful, because when I was trying to do it manually before we had AASCU data, it was, a little bit of intuition, a lot of data mining, a lot of intensive going into the banner system and trying to figure out exactly how many students in each program needed what course and what the trajectory was. And that took a significant amount of time. But anyway, with using an initial webinar to kind of get a sense of the overall, where the over-enrolled courses are, where the under-enrolled courses are, where our balanced courses were, those kinds of things. Then I could go back to the chair and then say to the chair, dust off last fall's schedule, see what are some needs that you have that you've been jotting down. And then we're going to have an Ad Astra webinar, again, except targeted for the chairs in the College of Education of the various departments and the various programs. And again, we find these to be very helpful, precise data on what seems to be some areas of continued concern of under-enrollment or over-enrollment. And ours lately have been over-enrollment issues because our budget keeps tightening. And as your budget keeps tightening and you're trying to serve the students, you end up trying to fill those courses to make sure you're offering the set of required courses that are needed. And in the College of Ed, I have to tell you, we don't have very many electives. So that means everything's required. And the time to program completion is really important, because you want to make sure that students are graduating in an appropriate amount of time. 4 years if they're go from freshman to senior, a year and a half if they're graduate students. So anyway, once that information is obtained, what I found is in those webinars, what happens is that sparks start flying in the chairs' heads about how they can coordinate, what they really didn't understand from just looking at the previous schedule or getting complaints from students. And they go back and they're really motivated to revise those schedules and to make them more efficient, even before we meet as a collective of chairs and dean in the College of Ed before they have to submit their schedule. The other piece that's so complicating for the College of Ed is that we're clinically rich programs, which means we have 100 hours of early field coursework or field work before the students even get to student teaching. And then they have 80 days of student teaching across 2 different placements, in addition to having 126 credits or 120 credits of coursework. So we have to really make sure the timing is accurate. And there again, the Ad Astra analysis really allows us to go in and look at how the efficiency of our schedule and see where we might be able to offer courses on a Tuesday, Thursday at a certain, in an earlier time to kind of clear some of that time in the middle of the day when the candidates need to be going out into the field. So again, we've really increased our efficiency in our offerings based on additional data. And once we get that draft schedule, we take that in, and then we look at registration as it starts. And then again, now we didn't have Monitor, which is a new application, which I can't wait to start using, but we go in every day and look at the data that we get from AASCU, and also to see how the courses are filling across each of the courses, across all of the programs, to see where do we need to collapse sections, where do we need to add a section. Although I have to tell you, in this era of COVID-19, we're not, if we add a section, we've got to collapse a section. We do not have the finances right now. And additionally, and I'm sure New York is not the only state that this is happening in, we're being asked for a second level of cuts for the 2021 academic year. And in academic affairs, where are you going to cut? The only pot of money left is adjunct budget. So, you know, we've made about I think about a 10% cut right now, but we're kind of holding our breath for another 15% cut that's coming down from the state. And I really don't know where we're going to get that money, but we'll do what we can. Now, the other piece that I find that's really helpful is I make sure that every single chair has fills out a faculty workload grid for all of their faculty and all of their adjuncts, and an adjunct projection spreadsheet. So as they're making these changes, they're changing those other two charts so that visually you can see how you're reallocating your faculty resources and how that's changing your adjunct budget. So in doing that at this time, that's been a lifesaver in trying to figure out, using the AASCU data, using the, you know, what we see in terms of the fill rates just from our scheduling information that we get on campus, about how we can make a more efficient, effective schedule. And then just one more thing I'd like to say, I've really found that the more you use data too in this manner, then it allows the chairs and the faculty to own what might make sense in terms of changing the curriculum, revising the number of credits of completion. Like we just spent about 3 years ago, a whole year reducing the number of credits by program because we saw that the number of credits was just outrageous across the dual cert programs. And so we looked across all of the programs to see where we could create efficiencies, core pedagogical courses, pathways to graduate programs. And that's how we came out with the 3 multi-awards, and really refining that curriculum across the undergraduate and graduate program so that students can step into a program their freshman year and know that if they follow this pathway, at the end of 5 years, they're going to have 4 certifications and 2 degrees. And for the student, that's very motivating. It's motivating for them to continue on that pathway. And then, of course, the other piece, I think, in terms of curriculum in student success is that you've got to give students feedback every single semester on exactly how they're doing. Where are they being successful? Are they meeting the GPA requirement? Where do they need to kind of beef it up and take additional courses? And they get that email every single semester about where they're at. And if they need additional assistance, we bring them in and we wrap around the additional intervention so that we can optimize their opportunity to complete the program. So I think that's about it. That's SUNY Fredonia in a nutshell.
Thanks so much. That's a really great review, Chris. We really appreciate it. So Steve, our provost from Stephen F. Austin.
Hi, thank you everyone. I appreciate being involved today. And much like what Chris said, Stephen F. Austin was created as a teacher's college only about 100 years later, 1923. So we're coming up on our 100th anniversary pretty soon. We have about 13,000 students, about 2,000 of those are graduate students. And so we're a mid-sized regional comprehensive with about 700 faculty FTEs. Our largest college does continue to be the College of Education with about a third of our enrollment. What I'd like to do today is to share some things that we've been doing using actionable data that wasn't available until we had AASCU and Platinum Analytics. To go back to what some of the things that Tom was saying, Tom, that circular diagram you had with student success at the middle, to me speaks to what we're trying to do, that everything that we're doing in revamping things is focused on seeing students be more successful in terms of completing the graduation with the lowest debt possible and all of the positive factors that can happen there. We think if we focus on that and truly focus on it, it leads to a virtuous cycle where enrollment and some of the other good things will lead to them. So we want semester credit hours. I mean, basically that's our currency. But if we just focus on semester credit hours, we're focused on, it's like focusing on the golden eggs from the goose. What we really need to do is tend to the goose, and the eggs will take care of themselves. And that's what we've been trying to do for sure for several years now. Otherwise, you get into a death spiral because we are, as Chris said, we're all facing financial challenges. And if you start cutting back on the economic engine of the university, you can't generate more revenue. It's a downward spiral forever. And I don't know, the phrase I've been using is, it's a Hobson's choice, but we can innovate or we can evaporate. And it's happened even more quickly with COVID-19. It was true before that as well, but now it's truly critical. So we've done some things that have had short-term impact on financial strength. But again, we did it to meet student needs, but we knew that it also made financial sense. And I'll just go back a couple of years, but in the spring of 17, we were in a financial situation in the state where we were cutting. The governor had imposed a state hiring freeze. We were not hiring faculty, and we were ratcheting back on everything to try to make the budget balance. And for example, on my side of the house, I was cutting $2.1 million out of my academic affairs budget. But during that same semester, we added 19 lecturer positions. We added rather than cutting back, again, to meet student needs. The reason we were able to do that was using the actionable data. We looked at where we had the high enrollment ratios, what Chris referred to as fill rates. It's the same thing as a hotel having a fill rate, but the enrollment ratios in our classes. And we looked at where the bottlenecks were, and boy, there were many. We were strangling ourselves by not allowing students to take what they needed, when they needed it, at the day and time that they're required in their curriculum. Anyway, of the ones that we added, so they were all lower level, entry level, core curriculum classes. We added 4 positions in English, 3 in math, 1 in chemistry, 4 in history, 4 in comm studies, 1 in philosophy, and 2 in political science. We wound up hiring 15 people to start in the fall 17 semester. And immediately, every one of them had a full course load. When we calculated the rate of return on that, the payoff was within about 5 or 6 weeks. We had already recovered our investment and had made a couple $100,000 of basically revenue surplus in that one semester. And of course, those are annual contracts. By the end of the spring semester, we had generated an additional $1 to $1.5 million net. So it was a no-brainer to add those positions. And of course, they're lecturer positions. They're not tenure track in the sense that if the demand is not there, we do expect continued employment because, again, if we do our job right, we will have continued enrollment and continued demand. But to get that done at a time when we were cutting, I had to convince the president, I had to convince the CFO that it was worthwhile. And that's where the data came in. And so we had multiple meetings with every dean and chair and the CFO in the room, along with our data analyst, to build that into the budget to get approval. Anyway, since that time, we've also continued. We've been using Platinum Analytics, routinely taking the data we have and further concatenating it to make it so that It's very easy to read. We put it in a spreadsheet, make it very easy to read, and then we put that at a Teams website so that everybody in real time can see where we are, where the enrollment ratios continue to be too high, where the course enrollment ratios are too low. Why are we not doing away with that section and adding another one of another class? And we did that all fall and early January of this past academic year. And again, we calculated very quickly an immediate return on the investment for that. Very positive decisions were made because we had good data. If you have good course enrollment, course planning data in the computer, then the Platinum Analytics can give you good information on decisions to make. And then now, post-COVID, right now, what we're doing literally in real time, Chris mentioned Monitor. We're now using Monitor for daily summaries. I have a direct report that is monitoring Monitor, watching that and making sure that every dean, every department head, and every decision maker is adding the seats and sections needed so that we're meeting the student demand in real time. And we've seen that was true for the summer, and our semester credit hours this summer are up by 2,000, which we expected a real downturn. And our student registration data for the fall actually shows a positive as well, although that can be funny because it's a long way until the fall semester starts. And in Texas, the census day is the 12th class day, so it's a long time until then. Anyway, and the last point I make, those three things that we're doing there are all mid, short-term, immediate-term things that you can do that will have a positive impact on revenue, more than enough to pay the cost. One long-term thing, and that is midterm to long-term. Chris mentioned it as well, being willing to completely change a curriculum. And we're doing that as well. We're taking the hood off and rebuilding the engine. And we have to do that continuously. And if you've ever done that, I know there are a lot of academics on the call. If you've ever done that, it is literally like moving a graveyard. You better get it right because you're going to be digging up family bones, and the process really needs to be right. You have to engage all the faculty in that area. And of course, from an accreditation standpoint, they have to own the curriculum. But if you get it right, you can make major change. What we found in using there's a program that was developed out of the University of New Mexico. The software is free, and I'm sorry I don't have the title for it. Maybe we could add it later, but they have a computer program that's free to use to evaluate curricular complexity. We've used it in multiple programs. We want a curriculum to look, and you see those beautiful pine trees behind me. East Texas has a lot of beautiful pine trees. We want the curriculum to look like that, very focused, not like a live oak tree with the branches going out immediately, because that's too many options for students and it leads to lack of success. Anyway, I'll stop right there. Again, I appreciate being involved today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve. That was really great. And, you know, one of the things that popped out to me during both of your discussions, Chris and Steve, is this issue of kind of helping faculty understand both the cost equation and how that impacts the courses they're going to be teaching. So Chris, I'm curious, how did you approach those issues with your faculty?
Well, I think what we did was I met with the whole faculty and I explained the process and I explained the rationale, and I committed to them that I was going to be transparent and share as much data as I could with them as we were going along, so that they would appreciate that what we were doing was based on ensuring that our students are successful. And that gets the faculty. The faculty are always very caring about students. And so if you can always pose it from the perspective of this is for benefiting our students, you get the buy-in. And then also it provided them with an opportunity to give me input, to give the chairs input. And so we regularly meet once a month, and that often comes up. And then once a semester before registration, we actually go over the data. And I send them the Ad Astra data that we get. The whole faculty listserv gets it. That way they're seeing it too. So that when the chair walks down the hallway and asks them to change a course or, you know, make some kind of adjustment, they know that it's part of the collective thinking. So I found that to be the most successful way to get faculty buy-in.
Yeah, that's so great, because what I find is important is having that real-time data, being able, like you said, being able to walk down the hall and say, hey, you know, these are your numbers. Because a lot of times, I know when I was a provost, we didn't have anything digitized. It was kind of done by hand. And, you know, it was hard to, you know, run and tell the faculty, hey, you know, and it was always done at the last minute. We weren't kind of keeping these real-time numbers going for the faculty. So Steve, I'm curious if you do similar types of things with your faculty.
Absolutely. When I was a dean, we changed the curriculum. We took it apart, built it. And what I found, the very thing that Chris just said and what you said, Terry, is that if you start with the data and you start with the why, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Simon Sinek and start with why, the what and the how will follow. But also we have a time right now where all of us have to have a sense of urgency.
Mm-hmm.
And that's new for many of our faculty. And so we have to completely explain the why behind some of our changes. There is an urgency, and financial health, again, it's a Hobson's choice. It really is not a choice. It's
right.
Innovate or evaporate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, particularly state institutions, it's not like you have easy ways to control your budgets. And that's something, you know, I found that it's often hard to get across to faculty that the, you know, course scheduling is directly connected to the budget. And so, but it's amazing, you know, with Ad Astra, it's relatively easy to show that with the data, right? So I think that's something that I would really appreciate as a provost, to be able to say, look, you know, here's the direct correlation between those numbers in students in your class and how that plays out in your budget, and why we may need you to teach this class instead of that class. I don't know if that's been your experience thus far, Chris and Steve.
What you're describing, Terry, is being centric toward the student instead of being faculty centric. And that's the whole paradigm shift that we're doing in higher ed. Again, I've been either an assistant prof or an administrator since 1983. So I'm in my 19th year of administration, was 18 years as a faculty member. And I've seen that shift. It was faculty centric in the early 80s, and now it better be student centric, or we won't have an institution.
Yeah, I think that's the reality that a lot of people are waking up to. And another thing that I've been talking a lot about on LinkedIn and so on is that, you know, you guys are the institutions that really matter. Right? Not that the other ones don't, but, you know, what's happening at these R1 institutions is a little bit removed from the reality on the ground for you guys, where you're really the heart of what's happening in higher ed, because, you know, it's the vast majority of students are going to institutions like yours, you know, and community colleges too. They're not at these, you know, elite R1, they're elite for a reason. And so I'm curious how you're finding the faculty are, I mean, it seems like they're coming around to understanding how to be student centric and how to use these tools to make sure that students are getting, you know, really what they need from their education. And so I'm curious how that's impacting, you know, their attitude towards teaching versus research and things like that.
You know, I think and it's probably true for Chris as well, as a regional comprehensive, we have a healthy approach to research and a healthy approach to service, but those tails don't wag the dog.
That's
the
great.
Student.
Yeah, it really emphasizing the student. Chris, did you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the only other thing I'd like to add is that I think it's important to have the research be about as much linked to teaching and effectiveness of the enterprise of public education, and having faculty collaborate as professional learning communities so that they're doing research together, because then they're there to support one another. But you're right, the research doesn't wag the dog of teaching, but I think there's a way to make it complementary and have some rich, wonderful scholarship and service if you engage faculty in the decision making or the, you know, the data. I think they're willing to, and so you've got to meet with them regularly. I think that is so critical. You know, having regular times when you meet with them, when they know you're looking for their input, that you're disclosing as much information as you can. Like I know at the beginning of COVID-19, I immediately called a College of Education meeting because I wanted to lay out the dilemma before them. We had 3 or 4 days to actually, to repurpose face-to-face instruction to virtual and to do something about all the clinical work, hundreds of students that were out in the field that now had to continue in a virtual way. So I'm all for communicating with faculty, and I do think it makes a difference. But I think at this time, I still feel like that faculty have a difficult time understanding just the urgency of the financial dilemma because things are changing so quickly, and I'm not quite sure what to do about that.
Terry, can I ask your thought on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's, we're in Texas, there are 38 public institutions. UT Austin is one of 38, and Stephen F. Austin is one of 38. But only 4 of those are independent, and we're one of the 4 independents. So we have a separate board of governors, board of regents to govern the university. Anyway, the chair of our board of regents went to the faculty senate 3 years ago and made a presentation where he specifically said, we can't be JCPenney in an Amazon world. We knew even then, again, things have changed dramatically. These threats cannot be ignored, and we have to adapt or we'll perish. So I've used that ever since then. We can't be JCPenney. And of course, we've seen what's happened now post-pandemic. But the point is, Amazon focuses on the things we're talking about today. They focus on 3 things. It's the selection, product selection. So in our case, are the courses offered? It's price. And students are increasingly price sensitive because in an Amazon world, they can take that course anywhere they want to online and get accredited for it. And then time to delivery. Do we offer it when they need it, in the format that they need it? And again, that's the challenge that we're facing. But I do think it's a time now when we have a lot of faculty who are engaging in that, and the real leaders, the real thinkers are doing that.
Hey, Terry, before we leave the topic of student versus faculty centric, because Stephen and Chris have laid out some great best practices on how to engage the faculty with data and transparency and being more forward looking. I just want to point out from our experience, we've been at this for over 24 years now, that I am always impressed by faculty's willingness to put the student in the center of their decision making, provided, and I think this is important, provided that the data, the transparency, and the vision are very clearly cast. If those things are available, I think it's a false dilemma, frankly, to try to pose it as a faculty-centric thing, because I don't think the faculty really want to be in the center. I don't think they believe that they are the center at most institutions. So I think, good data, good leadership, really, as exemplified by these 2 institutions, it goes a long way to ensuring that the student is practically in the middle.
Yeah,
and that's especially true, going back to Terry's point, at AASCU institutions. I would challenge you at some of the R1s. My career was all at R1s before I came to Stephen F. Austin 11 years ago.
Yes, mine too. And before I went to Menlo College to be provost, and I have to say, I was excited to go to a student-centric institution. So.
Yeah, I felt like when I came to SFA 11 years ago, I came back to a university the way a university was supposed to be.
Yep.
It was focused on the student.
Yep. I agree completely with that. And there's nothing wrong with having R1 institutions, right? And research-centric institutions. I mean, they're doing a lot of great work that is important. Everything from the science around viruses to, education and so on. But the reality is that we need to have these institutions that are student focused, and absolutely these AASCU institutions are really critical to that. And that's why I'm a big fan of, these institutions that are really focused on students and especially as we see the changing demographics of students. And that I want to come to another question though before we start to wrap up is, how are you fostering collaboration among your departments and divisions for these kind of short-term, long-term academic program planning? Because it seems like collaboration within an institution is really critical to this as well. either one of you can go ahead, Chris.
Well, I think we've been successful in that academic affairs leadership has that first webinar related to Ad Astra. Then it gets a little bit fragmented and fractured as the deans go off to the various colleges and work with their chairs. And one of the things that I've been actually looking at in terms of Ad Astra is having the data analysts go back and look across the colleges for Gen Ed, for the educator preparation courses that may have different prefixes, but are the same course. And when we had 4,000 more students, that was fine to have those differentiated same methods courses, but now we need to start combining them. And there's a little bit of a resistance to that because I think the colleges, the departments feel like, well, we've always had an MAED 205. Why do we have to change it to an EDU 205? So that's where we're massaging it and trying to help them see the data and the sense to, reallocating faculty resources in a different way. But it's been a bit of a challenge. So that's where we're presently at.
Steve, did you have some thoughts?
Yeah, well, I found to be very careful not to build false competition among programs. Like if we say it's all about semester credit hours and we're going to reward the programs that go up in semester credit hours, that's a false horse race that just leads to competition that's not healthy. What you want to make sure is be sure that everyone has resources they need, but we're supporting those in their efforts to meet students' needs. But I don't know if you're at all familiar with Covey's 7 habits. I found that using those 7 habits, they're timeless. And we just can't have false competition. We do have to look for those win-win situations.
Yes, absolutely.
And celebrate them.
Absolutely, yeah. Trying to get to those win-win situations is so critical in these times, especially, because we're all going to be under pressure in various ways. So before I come to my last question, I just want to remind everybody that a recording and a link to the slide deck and spreadsheet and all of the information is going to be available to those who are registered, and participants are welcome to stay on the call to talk more about specific strategies and tactics for responding to real-time enrollment fluctuations. And participants can share what they're doing at your institutions and ask questions of each other, as well as the Ad Astra team will be here. So my last question is really a broad one because I'd like to just kind of wrap things up with some advice. And given we're going to see a lot of financial constraints going forward, and it's kind of scary. I mean, I shouldn't say kind of, it is scary going into the fall. And so what advice would you like to leave with our participants as we start to look forward to, as we continue to look forward to a very uncertain future? You want to start, Chris?
Sure. Well, I wrote down what Steve said: innovate or evaporate.
That's really good.
And I really believe that we've got to be courageous. We've got to look at what we're offering. We've got to be willing to pull the hood off, as you said, Steve, and think about how are we going to repurpose things to better serve our students and to serve them by offering additional new programs that are critically needed as presented by the data. And I think the advice is just be creative, collectively think together, and don't be afraid to think out of the box and think about what might be better. How do you improve the vitality of your institution? And not just by, cutting, but looking at innovation and changing.
Yeah, Steve?
That's key. That word, probably everybody on the call remembers a book from a couple of decades ago called Who Moved My Cheese? The little parable. Now you can watch YouTube videos on it and so on, but really embracing the change is critical. If we just try to fight it or argue about it, that this shouldn't have happened, we have to lead change going forward. And one reference, everyone can Google this. The article's free. It's a Harvard Business Review article. It's a classic. There's a book written by John Kotter with a K, Leading Change. Step number one is establish a sense of urgency. I think the pandemic has done that for us. But step number two is build a powerful guiding coalition. And that goes back to your question, Terry, about how do you get people to work together? You get those guiding coalitions to help guide the decisions, and then they become collective decisions, not someone from top down saying, here's the way we're going to do it, let's go forward. Because leadership, everybody on this call knows this, but leadership in academics is not the same as military or corporations.
Yep, absolutely. That's why we started the Center for Higher Education Leadership, because it's a different world. But Tom, besides giving advice, we have a question for you from the attendees. Can you talk a bit about the themes and concepts behind your Insight Higher Ed op-ed?
Sure. Yeah, and to try to tie that in, that op-ed that just ran was really about learning as much as we can about our students and their increasingly more complex needs and other outside challenges that they have to manage, and then really building new models around that. One of the models that that we discussed was looking at a pre-registration model that would be data-driven. So in other words, think about this is a little geeky, but think about the critical path methodology for project management, which revolutionized a lot of project management, and dating all the way back to World War II. And the key that they found was you have to identify where the system is bottlenecking and put an inordinate amount of energy on those bottlenecks and manage that. So in the case of student progress, which is really what we're talking about here with building a schedule, it's all about how can we accelerate what we call degree velocity, right? And in our case, it's really the realization that that if there are 30 students that are trying to get seats in a particular section of a particular course, there may be some that absolutely have to have a seat in that course or their completion will be delayed, period, end of subject. All the way to students that just are interested in taking that as an optional class because it sounds like a fun topic to take to fill out their elective bucket. And unfortunately, a lot of times the students in the latter category outrank the students in the former category from a credit hour accumulation standpoint. So the article talked about how upside down that was, that a super senior, let's say, hypothetically, they might have changed their majors a couple of times and might have enough money to kind of stick around and still be in their 6th year. They're going to be at the first of the line, whereas they might have the least urgent need for a seat in that particular class. So that's really what it spoke to. And I think, kind of broadening the view a little bit on that, looking, I think we need to look at our systems and how, not only how we can kind of philosophically approach things with the student in the center, but can we build systems that are repeatable and that also make us more nimble? Because I think the other theme that we're seeing now, because we don't know what's going to happen, right? I mean, if I would give anybody some advice, it's don't try to read an article and bet on a horse here about what's going to happen in the industry or at your institution with some macro trend. Instead, build systems that allow you to be nimble and data informed. And I think that's the best thing we can do right now.
That's great. So we're going to transition now to office hours, and everybody is very much welcome to stick around. We had a last question to Steve about platinum analytics, and we can also ask the folks here who are with us from Ad Astra to talk about. I'd like to hear actually a little bit more discussion both about what's happening more recently with platinum analytics, but also this idea of degree velocity, because that's such a critical component. I mean, if you can tell your students that they, you can almost guarantee that they're going to graduate in 4 years. I mean, that's a huge, given the cost factors. I mean, I know a lot of students here in California are concerned because, oh my God, if I go to, San Jose State, it's going to take me 6 years to graduate because I can't get the classes I want. I mean, and believe me, that's what I hear from parents. So we're going to transition into office hours.